have to remind myself we are recording and trying to stream as much of the meeting tonight as we can for people that aren't able to be here in person. But I want to open up by thanking those of you who came for being here and those who are watching via video. Thank you for participation. It's vitally important as we look to the future of our community that we get input from the members of the community that have invested their heart and soul in who we are and who we are to become. One of the ways I tell my staff is that we got to figure out who we're going to be when we grow up, and that makes us slow down and ask some questions and think through what those answers should be. The other thing I tell my staff is that I never want to pretend to be Moses, because Moses had a very hard life, and I don't want to echo any of that. But one of the things that Moses did is he went up on the mountain and had a meeting with God, and then he came down from the mountain with these tablets and said, here are the rules. And that was God's way, and that was God's design, and I'm not going to argue with it. I'm not going to go up on the mountain and have a conversation with God and then come down and tell you what we're going to do. It's not the way you do local government. And so we want to have these conversations. We want dialogue. We want input from our community so that we together can define who we're going to be when we grow up. And so tonight is not the end, but you could say the end is in sight from here. Of a process of us trying to figure out downtown, who do we want to be when we grow up? And a lot of times we get questions about why is downtown important? Because the rest of the town is important too, and we agree. But a couple of facts and things that are changing in the world and the society around us. I was in a training and a webinar this week talking about economic development and the climate in the United States and even internationally for doing economic development and trying to recruit and get people to move to your community for investment. And the world is changing. I don't have to tell you that, but the economic development world is changing. And what was true 5 years ago may not necessarily be true now because of the impacts of COVID. And one of the impacts that they're finding as they do surveys is that companies, the first thing they look for is quality of life for their employees, because you can kind of live anywhere now and do most jobs. And used to be the job was important and the town was secondary. Now they find the town is important and the quality of life is important for the employees that they're going to recruit and bring in. And if they don't see quality of life in your community when they come visit, they're going to go down the road. And one of the things they look at is the downtown. And so these firms that go around and look for locations, they will visit a downtown. And if it's vibrant or if it's growing and becoming vibrant, they see that as a healthy indicator for your community. If it's dead, dying, and decaying, they feel like that's a reflection of your community and they're going to go invest somewhere else. So downtown is more important than just those of us who live here having a cool place on Saturday night to go hang out. It's more than that. And so we want downtown to be a reflection of our past, who we've been. We want to preserve that past, but we also want to look to the future and who we can become. And so that is the purpose of this process, is creating a master plan that does both. And so for our process, we've been fortunate to have Wendy and her team from Friese Nichols that have done a great job so far on helping us through this. And so as I turn it over to Wendy, the last thing I want to say is that the things that you hear and see tonight, it is a vision and is our intent of who we want to be when we grow up. The exact specifics of is that tree going to be right there? I don't know. We haven't actually designed it yet. We want a tree somewhere around there, but it may not be right there. Because, you know, they actually put a tree in front of our mural over there, and we're like, no, we're not going to put a tree in front of the mural. So nobody complain about the tree in front of the mural because we already did that for you. But it's the intent. It's the vision of who we want to be when we grow up, and then the fine details of what it looks like. We've got time. We're going to figure all that out. But this is a snapshot of our intent of what we hope to be when we grow up. And so I'm going to invite Wendy. She'll introduce her team, and then we'll walk you through the evening. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I see some familiar faces from the last time we were here, so I really appreciate y'all coming out on this gorgeous fall night. Hope you can stick around downtown afterwards. I would just echo everything Howdy said. He said it very eloquently, but I just got back from a planning conference all last week, and very much the same trend of what we're hearing about how important downtowns are to the city. So appreciate all those comments. Tonight, how many of you were here at the last meeting we presented? Say, I see a lot of is anyone not here? Is this their first time? Okay, we got a few. Okay, good. Good. Well, I'm going to recap a little bit about what we did at the last meeting. I'll go through a little recap of that, talk about our vision and goals. I'm going to spend most of our time on the master plan and where we are and what some of our proposed ideas are, as you've probably already seen on some of the boards behind you, and then talk briefly about implementation. So my name is Wendy Bonneau. I'm with Friese and Nichols. Been at the firm 18 years and love doing this kind of planning. It's a fun city, and downtowns are always super fun. I've got a talented group of folks with me. Sherry Chang is one of our landscape architects. She's the genius person behind all the renderings that you see. Chris Sissom is also both planner and landscape architect and working on the plan. He will be taking notes tonight, so if I'm not writing things down, it's because Chris is typing everything. And then Kevin St. Jakes, one of our transportation planners, does a lot on roadway and traffic and works on this kind of scale projects. And we've got a few other folks that are working on the team. So just from a recap, talk about the study area. We're focusing our efforts on the downtown area, what you see, basically the brick streets, if you will. That's the main area of focus that we're looking at. But if you look at this map behind me, the yellow area outlines the broader area that we're looking at, going up to O'Neill, down to Sycamore, kind of getting the blocks outside of Park and Washington, and looking at that entire core area. That's the area of which we're studying as a part of this plan. At the last meeting, we did a lot of exercises, got a lot of great input. We did a vision board. This is just a snapshot of, everybody wrote their vision of what they wanted to see on there. Some of the key things that we heard is that we want to improve the sidewalk accessibility and just the overall aesthetics of downtown. In the Park and Plaza area, which are two specific things that we're focusing on as a part of this project, is the area right out here, this blank area right out here in front of City Hall, looking at doing a plaza there. So you'll see we've got a little bit more detail on that. And then on the other side, looking at a farmer's market area. So the idea of bringing more green space, and then just branding. How do we improve people knowing about downtown? Y'all got a great downtown, but we know some people stop at Texas A&M Commerce and never actually make it all their way here and see how great it is. So how do we improve that branding? We had shown some concept plans at the last meeting. Again, a lot of feedback on that, and so we've taken all the feedback that we got from that, and you'll see that in what we're presenting tonight. Just some specifics of some of the things that people mentioned to us to make sure that we were including to make it walkable. We talked a little bit about parking and angle, parallel, where do we need parking? One of the things that we heard from you all in that was we were looking initially at trying to widen the sidewalks as much as possible, and we still are. But we kind of heard from a lot of folks that parking is really critical, and we don't want to lose the parking that we have. And so we did make some adjustments to some of the things that we did based on your comments from that. And then that got some input on some areas that may be a little bit hard that we need to figure out in terms of safety and how people turn and so on. So those were some of the comments that we heard. Couple of higher priority items. We had some concepts for both the plaza and the farmers market. If those of you who were here, we presented a couple of different options. We got some really good feedback on that. What are the key elements that we want to include in those things, such as shade structures and water feature and landscaping, lighting, and flexible seating. We also showed a couple of different concepts. Most people chose the bottom concept for the plaza, which again you'll see a refined version of that tonight. And then for the farmers market, we had a couple of different options, and most people preferred again the bottom option, concept B. So we'll present those in just a minute. So in addition to just looking at the core of downtown and Alamo and Washington and Main, we're also thinking about all the ways that we get to downtown and the signage and the roads to that. We know that there is some improvements to make in some of those roads outside of just that core. And, how do we sign that and those intersections? So we're certainly looking at that. Won't spend a lot of time on that tonight, but we are looking at all the different ways we get to that. There's some recommendations on those overall public network of roads. We've also broadened that out a little bit to look at, again, coming up on any of the key roads or from the university, how are we getting there? Like, for example, you'll see on the concept here in a moment, we've got a proposal to make this little leg of Washington Street one way for some traffic. But we also recognize, okay, if you're coming in from Washington from the north, then that's gonna hinder that. So really, how do we drive all the way up there? How do we drive people to Park Street rather than coming in on Washington for various reasons? Not that you can't, but from a signage perspective, we're broadening that out to look at the greater picture. So I just want you all to know that we're looking at all those gateways and how do we identify downtown. So based on some of the words and keywords in the vision board that you did the last time, we came up with a vision statement. This would be the only slide I read to you, but we tried to put some of the keywords that you all said into a statement so that if somebody asks, what's our vision for downtown, you're able to articulate that. It may not be exactly what we are today, but that's why it's a vision, because that's what we want to be. So Downtown Commerce is a regional destination for history, culture, and community. Locals and visitors are drawn to its unique blend of businesses, entertainment, and public spaces. Characterized by walkable streets, inviting outdoor spaces, and well-established architecture, Downtown Commerce functions as the heart of this close-knit community. So you can give us feedback in a little bit. Does that capture what you want? Is there anything that's missing? Is there anything that shouldn't be there? So we'll get more feedback from you as we go on. Some of the key goals. If you want to know, okay, what are we trying to do here? Well, we want to support the destinations that are there, but we also want to attract more people here. We want to build out those businesses and make it that destination place. We want to improve the pedestrian circulation, the vehicular traffic, and parking throughout downtown. We want to attract and retain retail, restaurant, and entertainment businesses that cater not only to the locals of Commerce, but also to visitors that are coming into Commerce. And then we want to be able to have a year-round calendar of events for that awareness piece, because again, y'all got some really great things that are happening, but looking at more activities to be able to bring those in. So what are some of the things, what are the recommendations, and how do we do that? So again, looking in that box of the core area, we did a conceptual land use plan, mainly looking at what do we consider the key core high priority areas that we need to focus on, and then what's some of the context of the neighborhoods around that area. So what you see up there in red are what we call the downtown core. Again, that's really what we're focusing on right now. It's mainly the key blocks of the historic downtown, but then it's also the area just north of Bonham Alley and Washington, where we're looking at the farmers market property. The blue area represents civic spaces. The green area represents park areas. And we'll talk a little bit more about all those. And then some of the pink and orange, the pink and purple are really just what are those areas around that core that could be eventually thought about as transition areas that could change and take place over time. So, and then residential being areas that we want to maintain as residential districts. So this is the overall illustrative concept plan. I know that the detail of this is hard to read on the screen, which is why we've got the boards, and we'll go through some of the details and zoom in on that. But assuming y'all can all see over my head, you'll see the brick streets, of course, where we're looking at improvements to all of those sidewalks. That is the area, again, that we're focusing on. Some improvements to Washington Street. You see the farmers market area that is just north of Bonham Alley, and improvements to that particular site. That is city-owned property, so that's why it's, we want to make sure that we're not necessarily running out any businesses that are there, but we're looking really at what the city owns and what we can control and what we can do things with. So that's our overall illustrative plan. I'm going to break this plan down into manageable chunks so you can see that a little bit further. So one of the key improvements here is Main Street. Initially, we were thinking about the possibility to maybe narrow that street a little bit so that we could provide more better sidewalk access. We can't really do that. We have met with TxDOT since the last time that we saw y'all because it is a TxDOT road, and we need that lane capacity. We heard before that we don't want to lose any parking, so we're not touching curb to curb. Now we do propose fixing the curbs that are there and the sidewalks, but the actual curb to curb width of the lanes, we're not changing those. We are trying to keep as much parking as possible. There are a few bulb outs where the trees are, that some are in pretty rough shape. Some of the trees are dying, and then some of them aren't in the best location for what we're doing. So as we think about the sidewalk improvement, we may be suggesting some improvements to some of those or some relocation of that. But again, general width of the street is the same, but do want to make better pedestrian connection from what would be the plaza across Domain and then eventually over to the farmers market. Better connection as you're going down Main Street and over to Washington, because right now you have to kind of cut over and go up the ramp. And I was walking, if y'all saw me walking around earlier downtown, I was exploring all that. So better connection to those areas. But again, shared use path and crosswalk improvements for that. These are just some examples of what some of those conditions would be. As Howdy mentioned, these are not, this would need to be designed. We know that there's grades, there's a lot of different issues that we have to deal with. So it's going to vary, but we have looked at ways we can continue the steps along Washington Street, because that's a little bit of a unique roadway there. But then where we can, bring that sidewalk out a little bit wider. In the case of this top middle picture, where you might have a little bit higher grade with stairs and ramps, but you would be able to have a little bit wider sidewalk, because I think we've had some people express we'd love to set some tables and chairs out there, have some outdoor dining, but right now we don't currently have the space. So where we can maximize that space, we want to be able to do that. And then there's those few corner instances where there may be some really creative things that we can do with planners to meet that ADA accessibility, and yet beautify those corners. Another street that we are looking at improving is Washington Street. In front of the buildings, again, that would pretty much, we would fix it, okay? It would be greatly improved, but the angled parking along that street is something that we had considered taking out. We have kept that back in, because it's one of the things we heard. But the one big change on this is considering Washington Street going one way, going north. Couple of reasons for that. Number one is just you've got a tight turn going in there, and so to make it a little bit safer going north. Another reason is if you're at the farmers market and coming into downtown, that sidewalk is very, very narrow. And so looking at how we can widen that sidewalk and make it more pedestrian friendly. You'll also notice the intersection up there at the very top left of the page, where there is an area shown That's the intersection of Bonham Alley and Washington. We know that that is unsafe right now. If you're coming down Bonham and you take a left-hand turn, that building is so close to the edge that it's a you have to almost pull out in the middle of the street to be able to take a left-hand turn. And so we have suggested fixing that road and take a Bonham Alley a little bit north. It would take a little clip of that northern property, but to be able to fix that intersection and make that much safer and at a 90-degree angle, and again, improve the pedestrian connectivity. You know, one idea for that, if you see these little, I don't know how well you can see it, probably can't see it great on that, but you'll be able to see it back there, is if we were to have a big event like your Boat Arc Days or you know, some big event, if we needed to close off Washington and make that really a pedestrian alley, then there is opportunity to do that. And that's one of the reasons we brought Kevin to this meeting, because we do want to make sure that we've got traffic flow around the area while making pedestrians safe. So there's a couple of ways to do that. You see in some of these images ways you can do removable bollards if you have in a big event to be able to do that. Make sure that there's real clear signage and access along those roads. These are some examples. This top left picture up here is actually a really, really cool plaza that Sherry designed, where we actually took a roadway. It can function as a roadway if need be, but it's got the removable bollards, but did some string lights, and it's where for events they have the food truck parking that goes along that road, but yet, you know, it's open for emergency vehicles and stuff. So things like that for being able to get over to the farmers market or Washington may be ideas for how we do that. And then in all cases, we're looking at how do we provide good signage and gateways and demarcation. This lower right photo where it shows farmers market, you know, that's one of those very low cost things that if you have a vacant building, if you can work with the property owners to just be able to do window dressing, it's kind of like if you go to the mall and there's a store that closes down and they put up, you know, something that's a nice muraled wall that you don't even really know that the store's missing. That's something that's a really low cost way, and it could give you all some great advertising for businesses that are in transition. So that's something that we suggest from a wayfinding perspective. Another road is Alamo Road, or Alamo Street. Again, keeping most of the parking. You'll see in just a moment when I show the opportunity for the plaza design, there could be one or two spots that are lost with doing that, but trying to make that make the stairs a little bit safer and that area right there. Also down at the end of Alamo, we know that there's a few blind corners there where people park kind of right at the end. And so what we're proposing, at least for conceptually, is that we have a continuous sidewalk all along these roads. So in one or two cases, it may mean losing a few spots. When we get down to design, if those are just really critical and we need to keep them, we can negotiate. We can talk about that. But for the purposes of putting a budget together and being able to apply for TxDOT funding, which is one of the things that we will be doing, we want to be able to show that continuous sidewalk. So, but we do know that some of these things with the big red circles, and you probably saw it on that one of those maps back there, those are just intersections and things that we really want to treat carefully and making sure that we're providing good pedestrian, vehicular access, and yet still trying to keep our parking as much as possible. So some of those pedestrian improvements, you just see some examples of, you know, different ways that we can do different things to be able to show. I mean, obviously you've got great brick streets already, so we're not having to add brick for a crosswalk, but there's certainly ways that we could better mark those different things. So this is a thought that from the plaza over to the farmers market. Right now there is an empty piece of land that I think that there's you know, talk about what we could possibly do with that. But whatever we do, one thing that we do want to make sure we keep is a good pedestrian corridor that gets from the plaza over to the farmers market. We want that view corridor to stay. So I thought this was an interesting example that Sulphur Springs did from the standpoint of they had a new building go in a piece of property, but there's this interesting little walkway that cuts through from street to street. And it's not super, it's not just a straight path, but it's very inviting. If y'all all been there, some of you have seen that, very inviting. Makes you want to walk down and we took our picture in front of the wings like probably everybody else does. So anyway, it was a neat little place, and we thought that that's probably pretty applicable of an idea of how to keep that going through. So those are the street improvements that we recommend in the plan. I want to now focus on the plaza and the farmers market design. Again, I give Sherry lots of credit. I'm going to present this for her, but feel free to chime in if you have any thoughts. We took all your comments from the last meeting that we had, and by the way, I probably should have mentioned at the very beginning, we have a great advisory committee committee that we've been meeting with throughout the process, so they've been giving us good feedback for that. So the idea of the plaza is that initially when we came in, we had a stage over with your mural wall as the backdrop. We heard some feedback that really we need the performers on the other side of the wall, and so we did some changing of this concept plan. So what this is showing right now, and I don't know if you can see this real well, but again, we'll explain it back there. But where you see the number 1 is obviously a green lawn. The number 2 over against the building opposite of the mural would be a stage area, only with a couple of steps up so that it's still multifunctional. You can use it for lots of things. You're not locked into a stage, but it does give performers a little bit of height there. We do have a water feature shown in this. I'll show you an example of what that looks like. Up by Muggs, I guess that way where the mural is and close to Muggs, we've got some crushed granite, some seating so that you could do some outdoor dining and removable seats out there. A great connectivity. We do think it's really important that we make sure that, you got this great entry out here in front of City Hall that connects across, and then we are connecting to the farmers market. So you'll see here just a preliminary opinion of cost. We looked at it in today's dollars and next year's dollars. This is next year's dollars of what that would preliminarily be. The greatest cost, if you can see these numbers, is the water feature. Everybody loves water features. They're a little bit expensive, and they're expensive to maintain. So I think what I want y'all to know is there's a lot of different things that could be tweaked on this. In fact, we had some ideas from the advisory committee meeting earlier that we think about shifting the stage a little bit and project almost at an angle to provide more shade. So there's a lot of different things that we can move around. I think the key thing that we want your feedback on is, do we have the right elements? Because a lot of these things can be designed. Is it the right scale? Is it the right elements? Because we want to make sure that we've got a cost. These are some renderings for that, so I'll let you take a moment to just be able to look at that. You'll see we've got the handicap ramp, which is going to be imperative that we get that in that area. We want some way to be able to call out the City of Commerce there. Again, if we've had some talk earlier of maybe we shift the stage a little bit, and the back side of that stage becomes the sign. So again, there's some different configurations and things we can do, but overall, I think the elements of this are some landscape features, an open lawn, trees where we can get them to provide shade, a water feature, and then somewhat of a raised performance stage, if you will. This is an example of that. This is an example of what that water feature could look like. This is just another view of that same plaza area, looking back, standing at the mural, and looking across. We have, in this particular concept, we've got a walkway along that. there could be, there's outdoor gaming things if y'all have ever seen the outdoor foosball tables or outdoor checker boards. I mean, things like that we could create. There's opportunities for those types of things within that. These are just some examples that we use for inspiration photos, if you will, for what to show. Key things are, this is a look of a water feature. We weren't doing it. Y'all are about to be doing a great spray park, so we're not going to be doing that. But we know that you've got a marble maker that has got opportunity to be able to pull some of that in, which would be cool. This could be something different. It doesn't even have to be a water feature. We could decide, we don't want that element. We want something else. We want to do public art, or we want to do a statue, or we want to do something else. There's other opportunities that we can do there. We do think it would be very, very cool to use your marble, your local, and be able to build that in. So you'll see in the bottom right photo of just ways that you could do landscape walls or seating walls and use your local materials. And this is just an example of a similar event lawn and how that stage, again, could be done. Just a couple of steps up so that it stays multifunctional, but it's got the plugs and electrical to be able to provide that. I think there's lots of cool things you can do with pavers, and I know you have some historical pavers, and so, making sure that those things are incorporated as much as possible, and then the landscaping. And then also just with lighting, you have a pretty distinct light within downtown right now. And so that's going to be a question if we redo streetscapes, are we redoing that lighting? Because you do have lighting that goes throughout. There's a lot of modern technology now that are solar lit. You can do a lot, probably better lighting and better technology right now that may not even cost you as much. And in some cases, we've seen some really cool examples of how those are multifunctional. You can plug in you can plug in your phone, you can play music out of them, so they become an element in and of itself. And then obviously just the other site furnishings and benches and things like that. Again, this bottom left picture is just different ways that we could use your local materials to be able to provide seating walls. Yeah, sure. Oh. Yes, bike rack, shared use path. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the farmers market across on the other side of Bonham Alley. Couple of configurations and thoughts here. So number one is just the pavilion itself, which is number 3 right there or number 1 right there in the middle. We do have a restroom as a part of this. I know that was a big request that we heard. So we do have a restroom as a part of this that could function throughout downtown, and we did reconfigure that again based on the input at the last meeting so that's more visible. We had that in the back, but people said no, we want that up front so that even if we're not using the farmers market, that still feels safe and accessible. So we moved that around. So we have that. We've got roughly about 60 parking spaces within that. We've got the corner of Bonham Alley and Washington, building number 4. That's just a footprint of a future building to be determined. It might serve as parking right now, but I do think that it is important that when we think about gateways, there's a couple of ways. You can think about gateways as true signs. You can think about it, downtown, the big arch. Or it can be the edge of a building that is really cool that's got, some kind of a sign included in it that becomes a gateway into downtown. So that's some of the things I want to think about are some of these edges and the buildings that meet at those edges. And so that's what that placeholder building is. We don't know what that is yet, but the idea of making that a part of what feels like downtown is what we're looking at for that. So there's a pavilion area back behind, also some images of that, back behind the pavilion of some seating areas. Right now, we have 11 and 12 just held. There is some city-owned land that goes all the way up to the railroad and open space. So future parkland, future open space could be in some form, if need be, parking, but really trying to hold that open as green space right now. So we tentatively have about approximately a $1.7 million dollar. A big piece of that is the restrooms in the pavilion. Those are costly, but we understand, they're needed to be able to hold the events. So that's the big cost element of this. But we like how it lines up with the city hall and, again, makes those improvements at the corner. We recognize that Bonham Alley has got to be improved as a part of this as well. So that's something we'll talk about too, but we recognize that. So this is just an idea of the rendering. If you were standing on the roof of Cork and Brew and looking towards the farmer's market, this is an idea. Ignore the white building in the background. I think that's too high density office looking, but it's just a placeholder to show that's some kind of building, okay? But the idea is something could go back there, but be able to have that parking and those restrooms that are visible. This is a view from the ground. Again, if you were to connect over to that, that's what that could look like. Could be bollards in Bonham Alley. Again, may not want to be, but if you were having a big event, you wanted to provide that continuous pedestrian path, then could be something that we put in terms of removable bollards. And then if you're standing back behind the farmer's market, the idea of having just some decomposed granite, some seating to be able to, that farmer's market to flow into that area. Again, we're thinking of all of these things as very multifunctional spaces that can be used for multiple things. You could bring in food trucks here if you're not doing farmer's market and have another type of event in this space here. So here's our inspiration pictures and just various examples of what we imagine and what we're pricing for that type of building. Something that we can put some sign on. You'll see some areas back behind that of just what we envision being able to look at that. And then with that park area, we could be some opportunity for some trail connectivity, or doing something back there. So those are some of our program elements for the farmers market. As we start to prepare, obviously tonight what we want to do is get your feedback and questions and anything you see. We'll be working on recommendations and an implementation plan. For what we've spent most of our time really focusing on are all these high impact projects, because I think each of these are big projects and they make big impact into the downtown area. The farmers market, the plaza, and then we have divided each of the streets up between Main, Alamo, Washington, Bonham Alley, and then do think that there's some opportunity for some gateways into those areas at Washington Street and Park Street. So those are the projects that I think are going to make by far the biggest impact. We don't want to lose sight of just the easy wins that we can do for a much lower cost. The window storefront art, is something that really makes a big impact that you can help do. There's just overall branding, being able to, I know y'all are already starting. I've talked to many of you last time that own businesses here and, working towards this collaboration of downtown business owners. So I heard there was a pop-up storefront. We had this on there, and then I heard that just happened, and so that's awesome, and sounds like that was a big success. So doing more of those things and bringing more people downtown, that was something we had on here before we knew that was happening, so that's awesome. I think that there's multiple buildings that you could do some really cool murals on, and they just, if you think about even the side of Laredo's coming in on Washington, I think you've got coming in on Park. There's a lot of cool buildings that, you could do something like that. Richardson, we're working on some stuff in downtown Richardson, and they've been putting murals on everything. And it just has added a lot to the vitality. And know somebody who's doing some of those, and it just become, people go and want to go take their picture in front of all the murals there. So you've already done some of those. I just think there's more opportunity for that. I think one thing, and we can probably talk more about this over at the board, but I will say that there are a few situations where we're not going to be able to solve all the problems, where you have a conflict between connectivity from a pedestrian standpoint, it's not good pedestrian access, or it's a little tight from a vehicular standpoint, or you got some blind spots, and then you have some uses. So in some cases, we need to understand what's most important to you. Do we want to keep the uses like they are, and we'll deal with the pedestrian and vehicular conflicts and not worry about it, but we want to keep the uses? Do we really want to make it more pedestrian friendly and safer for people to walk? And in that cases, some of those uses, we need to think about, what the long-term viability of some uses are. And then in some cases, it's, making sure we're making something safe for the vehicular. So I do think you have a few conflict areas, and we're trying to solve those. But, would love some thoughts on really what are we designing for, what's most important, because I do think there's going to be some conflicts that we're going to have to figure out. Like, we're going to need to lose a few spots to make it more pedestrian safety, or we're going to need to rethink a use to be able to do some of these road improvements that we want. So those are things to think about. So what we're going to do for the rest of the evening, we have a survey that we're going to be passing out here for a moment. We've got plenty of pens. If you didn't bring those, all I'll ask is you'll leave them with us. But we want to be able to get your input on those things that we've presented. We know that we probably can't pay for all of those tomorrow. Number one, we are going to be applying for some funding. TxDOT, some of the grants will pay for 80%. City only will have to match 20% of that. So we want to get in the queue to be able to get as much of those things paid for. There's other things that you can combine some funds for. So we're going to do the best we can to get you as much money as we can to be able to pay for all those things, but we also realize we may not be able to do them all. So I'd love to hear your priorities of okay, if we have to prioritize and we can only do one or two things, what are those? So if we're going to pass those out, give us your ranking of what you would do first. There's some place in there for comments of why, or maybe there's something else. Maybe there's something we didn't mention that you want us to add to the list, or there's other priorities. So we'll pass that out here in just a moment. So in closing, just to tell you all our next steps, we're going to be around for a while. We'll answer any questions that we have at the board. We will gladly talk through any specific, input you have. We'll take notes as we always do. Chris is over here going to be taking notes for us. But we're going to review all the comments that we got from the committee earlier today, and then also your comments tonight. We'll be revising our report. We'll be providing a final summary report to the city for review, and then we will be coming forward with adoption meetings to get this adopted so that we can then move on to hopefully the next step of getting some funding and then, further design. So with that, I think that concludes my part of the presentation. We wanted to be able to turn it over to Howdy and okay.
We're not putting the survey out yet. But as you do the survey, we have cost projections for some of these components, and we're not really using today's dollars because we're not going to build this tomorrow. We probably won't be building anything until the second half of 2023 or into 2024. We're trying to guess what those numbers will be, and that's what we've tried to include on the screen. And so once you get the survey document, as you're thinking through what are your priorities, price tags is probably an important part of that consideration for you. But before we hand the survey out, we just wanted to open the floor up to see if y'all have questions, maybe
handicap ramps, will you be smoothing the floor, or I mean the ground that people will be walking up and extending the railings back further?
In most cases, we'll be completely rebuilding the handicap ramps that are there presently. So, for example, backside of Goodfellows, there's a little bitty short ramp that's brick, and it's like surfing a wave on the ocean. Yeah, we'll be redoing most of the ramps through this process.
Awesome.
Okay, I live on Bonham Street.
Mhm.
If you make that one way, well, yes, they can go into the farmer's market, but the majority of traffic will be coming down Bonham Street. Right now, it is pitiful. Will Bonham Street be repaired?
At some point, we're looking at a street maintenance program to address all of our major.
Because that probably needs to be done. I mean,
Bonham Street itself is not part of our downtown master plan.
right,
That's part of
but
our
it
street
needs to be
maintenance
done
program.
at the same time. Because as you go through, even though you make the little jag and you go through, most people don't go on past.
Agreed.
They turn and they come down Bonham Street.
Yeah.
We have trucks, we have everything, and it's torn up.
We're looking at our street maintenance. That will definitely be under consideration. It's not part of tonight's plan, but it's definitely part of our street consideration. Andrew.
This is an exciting plan. That's great. Is there a lighting study that y'all have done about what it would look like at night? I mean, all these are during the day, but a lot of the people going downtown, they're going for concerts, they're going for dinner. Do you have a sense of what it's going to look like with the lighting you're talking about?
We haven't done a lighting study per se, but we have included as a part of the streetscape redoing the lights. And so, yes, for sure, as a part of that, because of where they're located, particularly those that are in the sidewalks. So we would absolutely be doing, as part of any design, we would have to do a lighting study and make sure that we've got that. And, and I think that there's endless amounts of possibilities in terms of what you can do for that. When we get into that, if or whoever gets into the design of that, that would be one of the things that would be decided probably at that point about what types of light. Do you want something similar? Is it more modern? Is it a historic look? I mean, there's a lot of different options, but
I would say at this point, the intent is downtown as it exists today. Sometimes the lights work, half the lights don't work, so you have stretches that's just really dark at night. So you have an uneven, unsafe sidewalk in a dark area. We want to eliminate all of that. And so as part of our streetscape and through this grant, hopefully, we can redo the sidewalks and have consistent lighting throughout the entire downtown so you don't have those dark spots.
A lot of times we overcorrect. Sorry. A lot of times I think we overcorrect and try to get everything as lit as possible. But a lot of the downtown ambiance people are looking for is much of a lower light in the right spots.
We don't want daylight 24 hours a day.
You may have mentioned it a while ago when you were talking about lighting upgrades and stuff and the different features that were available on some lighting. But is there a plan or a thought process to the possibility of piping music through the downtown area for seasonal stuff?
Yeah. We're definitely planning to install that feature. And so how we accomplish that, there's lots of different ways to pull that off. They've demonstrated there are light poles that include the speakers and that include Wi-Fi hotspots. There's lots of ways to accomplish that, but we do want to be able to have music played throughout downtown. We're looking at actually acquiring the licensing now so that we can start finding ways to accomplish that. But we want to have music, yes. No more from Andrew.
Could you go back one or two on the slides to the overall map?
Let me,
Sure. That one.
yeah. Just take just a second.
Uh,
There you go.
So one part that seems cut off is Park Street, Authors Park, and the library from the overall plan. Is that a TxDOT related issue there, or is there possibilities for interconnection there?
Well, as you know, we're already undertaking a pretty significant rehab project for the library right now, and so that's on the other side of TxDOT. And so we're cautious of trying to reach across TxDOT without inviting TxDOT in to take over. And so we've got some improvements that are underway to the library, and then you are looking at the possibility of maybe changing some of your parking lot layout. So until we have some more clarity on what that looks like, we didn't want to nail it down in the plan, but we're also hesitant to reach across TxDOT at this point.
Like there's been a lot of emphasis on the farmers market, which I find interesting since it's such a short span of the year that we use it. Is there a reason for that? Is there something beyond that?
Yes.
You have in mind?
Yes, we call it farmer's market because everybody knows what that space is. We intend it to be full year-round multi-purpose space. And so we're not designing all of this just for a couple of months of the year to be farmer's market. But if we started calling it the multi-use space, nobody knows where that is. But if we say the farmer's market, yeah, I know where you're talking about. So we're not doing it just so for a couple of months of the year we can have a farmer's market. We want year-round multi-purpose events to be held in that space, some of which will be also farmer's market. Yeah, we'll name it. Yeah.
Is the project for the farmers market, is the Bonham Alley consideration upgrade in part of that? That road is not very wide and not very accessible to be able to get in and out of what the farmers market multipurpose facility might offer. Are those two things pulled together?
I'll cautiously say no, because we didn't want to include that in the scope of our master plan because there's some very complicated factors that are involved in that. One, we have a very narrow right-of-way. There's not a whole lot we can influence and do, and any changes that we make directly impact viable businesses like Huffman's. And so there's some direct impacts to active businesses that need to be part of that conversation. And so, yes, I think some improvements to Bonham Alley need to be made. That's not within the scope of this master plan because there's too many unknowns at this point. But we did have a crossing of Bonham Alley and some bollards so that when we have events that come through there, we have the flexibility of protecting pedestrians that walk across. But ultimately, Bonham Alley needs some improvement. We have a lot of questions to answer before we can nail something down.
And one thing I would add to that, I recognize that we certainly recognize that before we do the stretch of Washington and making that one way, like that's probably that piece may need to be a longer thing until we had more clarity on Bonham Alley, because we wouldn't want to direct everybody there and then Bonham Alley's the shape that it's in right now. So we recognize there's like a little bit of a domino effect there that you would need to have to take that into account before you change that one-way piece.
My deal is about the water feature. I think you know we're building a splash pad down at City Park. I know everybody wants everything to look pretty, have this nice stuff, but if we scrap something like that she said was very expensive, as expensive to maintain, we're already maxed on city employees' budgets. You know, if we take that money, use it to fix some of the roads or better lighting instead of a water feature that we're going to continue to maintain, spend a lot more money on.
The water feature that they gave as an example we built it today, is probably $250,000. That's an expensive investment for a decorative piece. It's not a recreation piece, it's a decorative piece. And so we're hesitant to commit to putting that in right now. We did hear a lot of feedback that a lot of people would like something like that downtown. So we showed it to you. There's a price tag. We're probably going to hold our breath and wait a little bit. But we can, for a much lower cost, potentially use that space for a small veterans memorial. There's lots of different things that we can do that just as much are decorative and pull people into the downtown that don't require the ongoing maintenance of a water pump. So we're looking at all the options. A lot of people requested a water feature, so we included a decorative water fountain. Now that you see how much it is, hopefully you'll say, not yet. That's our goal. But we agree. They're nice, and I think that may be in our future, just not in the near future, in my opinion. I would say then let's open up and start allowing for some conversation around the boards, and then start handing out the survey. Again, what we're asking for is as you look at some of these component pieces, we've got some future pricing projections on what some of those pieces would be. Would love y'all's feedback in terms of a sense of priority. We're looking at a little over $6 million in total investment for everything that's on the board. We're not going to go spend $6 million tomorrow. But if we're going to spend something tomorrow, what do y'all think is the highest priority? Some of the things that we're already working on, as Wendy mentioned, we're putting an application into TxDOT. We're trying to get a grant from them to do all of the sidewalks downtown. The sidewalks is probably $3 million of that. If we can get TxDOT to pay 80% of that and we have to pay 20%, we love that model. There are other grants and other funding opportunities for some of these other components that we're going